The moment Officer Aaron Blake pointed and shouted, the whole parking lot learned how quickly dignity could be treated like suspicion. The red and blue lights washed over the wet asphalt outside a convenience store just after midnight, turning the puddles into sheets of broken color. And Marcus Holloway stood in the middle of it with both hands visible, his breath slow, measured, almost careful enough to calm the air itself. He had only stopped to buy heart medicine for his mother and a bottle of water for the drive home. But now every eye in the lot was fixed on him, as if a quiet black man in work boots had somehow become the most dangerous thing on that block. Marcus did not look dangerous. He looked tired. 38 years old, broad shoulders softened by long shifts at a machine shop, an old denim jacket darkened by mist, and that stillness veterans carry when they have already seen louder nights than this one. But Officer Blake did not see any of that. She saw what she had already decided to see. Her voice cut through the drizzle, sharp and public, the kind of voice meant less to ask questions than to make a person feel small in front of strangers. A couple climbing into a pickup froze with their doors open. A cashier inside the store pressed both palms to the glass. Somewhere near the gas pump, a phone lifted into the air and stayed there. Marcus swallowed once and kept his chin level. His left arm did not rise as fast as the right. Not because he was refusing, not because he was reaching, not because he wanted trouble, but because that shoulder had never fully healed after military service. The injury lived in his body like bad weather, flaring in the cold, tightening under stress, reminding him in quiet little flashes that some parts of sacrifice never get thanked, they just get carried. Still, he tried to explain. He spoke in a low, even tone, the tone of a man choosing peace while being denied it. But the more controlled he sounded, the harsher her commands became, as if calm itself offended her. His bottle slipped from his fingers and rolled across the pavement, tapping once against the curb before going still. Then the small paper pharmacy bag tilted from his hand and landed near his boot. The white label catching the squad car lights for one bright second before the rain dimmed it again. Marcus glanced down at it, and something in that simple movement made the entire moment feel heavier. Because suddenly this was not just about a traffic stop or a misunderstanding or an officer having a bad night. It was about a man who had worn his country's uniform now being treated like he did not belong in his own hometown parking lot, while carrying medicine home to keep his mother alive through another week. The night held its breath. The store's sign hummed overhead. Water dripped from the edge of the awning in a steady rhythm. And right there, under all that cold light, Marcus Holloway understood that this was no longer just an inconvenience he could outlast in silence. This was the kind of moment that could follow a man forever unless somebody, somewhere, finally decided to tell the truth. Marcus Holloway had learned a long time ago that the body remembers things the mind tries to pack away. It remembers the desert heat that pressed against your lungs like a furnace door left open. It remembers the sound of boots over gravel before dawn. It remembers the exact kind of silence that falls right before an order changes everything. Standing under the hard white glow of that convenience store awning, with rain collecting at the edge of his jacket collar, Marcus felt those old instincts wake up inside him, not with panic, but with precision. Slow breathing, open hands, no sudden movement. Keep your voice level. Make yourself smaller than the fear in front of you. The discipline had followed him home from overseas and settled into his bones so deeply that even now, years after the uniform had been folded away, it still rose before pride ever could. He had not planned for any of this tonight. His shift at the machine shop had run 10 minutes late because a belt on one of the older presses needed adjusting, and Marcus had stayed behind to help the youngest guy on the floor finish the cleanup. That was who he was in every room he entered. The man who lifted the heavier box without being asked. The man who took the last shift nobody wanted. The man who remembered when somebody mentioned a sick parent and quietly checked on them. A week later, he drove the same 12-year-old Ford pickup he had owned since his second year back home, kept jumper cables under the back seat, and still folded receipts into neat squares before sliding them into his wallet. His mother used to laugh and say the Army had turned him into a filing cabinet with shoulders. He always told her it was the Marines, not the Army, and she always waved him off like that technical detail mattered less than the fact that her son had come home carrying too much silence for his age. The medicine in that paper bag was for her heart, the good brand the doctor preferred, expensive enough that Marcus had started skipping lunch twice a week just to make the refill schedule hurt a little less. He had not told her that part. He never told her the parts that sounded like burden. At 38, Marcus had become the kind of man who measured love in practical things. Gas in her car before she noticed it was low, fresh batteries in the remote, soup already warming on the stove when the weather turned cold. And maybe that was why the humiliation of this moment settled so deep under his skin. It was not only the accusation in Officer Blake's voice. It was the insult to the life he had built so carefully after service, the ordinary, decent life he had earned one patient day at a time. Around him, the world kept making small sounds that felt too normal for what was happening. Tires hissed over wet pavement on the road beyond the lot. The ice machine hummed near the sidewall of the store. Somewhere inside, a microwave beeped once, then fell quiet. Marcus could smell coffee, rain, and motor oil from his own sleeves. He fixed his eyes on a crack in the pavement near the front bumper of the patrol car and reminded himself of the one truth that had carried him through worse nights than this. Fear could control a moment, but it did not get to define the man standing inside it. Officer Aaron Blake carried authority the way some people wore expensive perfume, too heavily and too often, until it reached the room before they did. Even under the flashing wash of patrol lights, there was something rehearsed in the way she stood, shoulders squared, chin lifted, one hand near her duty belt like she expected the entire world to answer to her posture before it answered to the law. She was not much older than 30, with a clean-pressed uniform, a voice sharpened by habit, and the kind of confidence that had never been forced to examine itself too closely. In her mind, control was proof of competence, and suspicion was a shortcut to control. She had transferred into the county less than a year earlier, and by then people at the station already knew the rhythm of her presence. She was quick to issue commands, quick to interrupt, quick to call hesitation defiance. She liked simple stories because simple stories kept her in charge, and on nights like this one, with a quiet black man standing in a rain-slick parking lot, she had already written the ending before anyone else was allowed to speak. To Aaron, Marcus was not a son carrying medicine home to his mother. He was not a veteran with a shoulder that tightened in cold weather. He was not a machinist still wearing the faint smell of grease and steel from a late shift. He was a shape inside a set of assumptions, and she trusted those assumptions more than she trusted patience. That was what made her dangerous. Not noise, not rage, certainty, the kind that leaves no room for another person to remain human. Her flashlight beam cut across Marcus's jacket, then his hands, then the paper bag near his boot, but she did not pause on any detail long enough to let it soften her judgment. Behind her, the patrol car idled with a low mechanical hum, its dashboard lights glowing dim blue through the windshield. Water gathered along the edge of her hat brim and slid off in a steady rhythm. The air smelled like wet concrete, gasoline, and the burned sweetness of coffee from inside the store. Every ordinary thing in the scene seemed to plead for perspective, but Officer Blake was standing too deep inside her own script to hear it. A man near pump 3 shifted his weight and lowered his eyes. The cashier stayed frozen behind a glass. The person holding up a phone kept recording, perhaps because some part of them already knew that when power loses its balance, memory becomes the first form of protection. Aaron took one step closer, and even that movement carried a message larger than words. It said she expected obedience before explanation. It said public embarrassment was an acceptable price for her comfort. It said she believed the badge on her chest made her interpretation heavier than Marcus's truth. And the hardest part was how normal she made it look. Not dramatic, not wild, just official enough to pass if nobody challenged it. Marcus saw all of that in a glance and understood the deeper danger immediately. This was not just a bad interaction with a tense officer on a rainy night. This was a woman who had built her identity around being unquestioned, and now she was being watched by strangers. That made her even less likely to step back. Because some people do not tighten their grip when they fear harm. They tighten it when they fear being wrong. Marcus knew the night had reached its most dangerous point when he realized Officer Blake was no longer listening for facts, only for confirmation. The rain had picked up just enough to bead on his eyelashes, and every drop that slid down his face made the parking lot lights blur into long streaks of red, blue, and white. He kept his hands where she could see them and spoke with deliberate care, each word placed like something fragile on a hard table. He told her his wallet was in his back pocket. He told her he was moving slowly because his left shoulder had been damaged years ago. He told her the paper bag on the ground held heart medication for his mother. None of it changed her expression. If anything, the calm in his voice seemed to harden her further, as if she had expected agitation and did not know what to do with dignity. So Marcus made the only choice a man in his position could make. He became even gentler. He lowered his eyes just enough to show he was not challenging her. He shifted his weight carefully, every motion small, measured, almost painfully respectful. The muscles in his shoulder tightened the way they always did under stress, that deep old ache blooming from the joint down through his upper arm, like cold iron pressed beneath the skin. He could feel the strain already, but he also knew one sudden movement, one misunderstood flinch, could turn this from humiliation into something worse. Around him, people were still watching. He could sense their attention the way you sense a storm behind closed curtains. Not loud, but present. A woman by the entrance held her purse close against her side and stared. A delivery driver stood by a soda machine with his truck idling, eyes moving from Marcus to Officer Blake and back again. Someone inside the store pushed open the door halfway, then stopped, as though even curiosity understood it had entered sacred ground. Marcus swallowed and tried once more. He explained that he had just come off a late shift. He explained that he had a receipt in his pocket. He explained that he was trying to comply. Each sentence should have been enough to lower the temperature of the moment. Instead, each one seemed to feed the fiction she had already chosen. Officer Blake stepped forward and corrected him in that clipped official tone people use when they want power to sound like procedure. She spoke over him, not to gather truth but to erase it. And there it was, the tiny hinge the whole night would swing on. Marcus angled his body slightly, so his stronger arm stayed visible while his injured shoulder did not lock up under the strain. It was a small adjustment, barely more than a shift in balance, the kind of movement any reasonable person would have recognized as careful. But Officer Blake reacted as if care itself were suspicious. Her posture changed. Her voice sharpened. The air in the lot seemed to tighten around that single second, until even the rain felt like it had paused to see what would happen next. Marcus stopped moving immediately. He did not argue. He did not plead. He just stood there with the medicine at his feet, the damp wind slipping through his jacket, and the knowledge settling heavy in his chest that this was no longer about what he had done. It was about what she needed him to have done. And when a person in authority starts chasing their own version of reality, innocence stops sounding like protection and starts sounding like a test. The humiliation did not come from noise alone. It came from how ordinary everything else remained while Marcus Holloway was being stripped of the benefit of being believed. Rainwater kept slipping off the awning in a soft, steady rhythm. The gas price sign at the edge of the lot buzzed with one dim corner light that had probably needed fixing for months. A country song played faintly through somebody's half-rolled truck window, too low to make out the words, but clear enough to remind everyone that the rest of the world had not stopped for this moment. Only Marcus's had. Officer Blake kept her stance rigid and public, the kind meant to send a message not just to him, but to everybody watching. She spoke as though her version of events had already become the official record, and that was what made the scene feel so cold. Marcus had done everything a man could do to lower the temperature. He had kept his voice level. He had explained his shoulder. He had answered without attitude. And still, somehow, his restraint was being treated like a problem that needed correction. A gust of damp wind moved through the lot and chilled the sweat at the back of his neck. He could feel the roughness of the pavement through the sole of one boot as he shifted slightly to ease the pressure on his bad shoulder. The paper pharmacy bag lay tipped on its side near the curb, darkening with rain, and that sight hit him harder than the patrol lights or the eyes on him ever could. His mother was probably awake by now, sitting in her robe by the lamp in the living room, waiting for the porch light to catch his headlights when he pulled into the driveway. She always listened for the truck before she looked at the clock. She would not know that her medicine was sitting on wet asphalt while strangers watched her son get spoken to like his existence needed to be explained. That thought settled in Marcus with a weight almost worse than anger. It was not fear that filled him then. It was grief. A quiet grief. The kind that comes when a man realizes that no amount of service, sacrifice, or self-control can protect him from someone determined to see the worst first. Nearby, the person with the phone stepped closer, not enough to interfere, only enough to make sure the frame was clear. The cashier finally pushed the door open all the way and stood just inside the threshold, one hand still on the handle, eyes wide with the helpless look of someone witnessing something wrong, but not yet knowing what safe intervention looks like. A second patrol unit had not arrived. No supervisor was there. No balancing voice had stepped in. The whole scene hung on the judgment of one woman who seemed to mistake dominance for duty. Marcus lifted his eyes just enough to look at her face and understood something crucial. Officer Blake was not trying to find out who he was. She was trying to preserve who she had already decided she was in this moment. The one in control, the one who could not be questioned, the one whose fear automatically outranked his truth. And right there, under the dull silver drizzle and the hard fluorescent glow of the store lights, Marcus felt the last illusion fall away. This would not end because she suddenly became fair. It would only end when something entered that parking lot stronger than her certainty. Then, almost without warning, the night exhaled. Not because Officer Blake softened. Not because the people watching suddenly found courage. But because the rain began to fall in a finer, steadier sheet, and the whole parking lot seemed to lose its edges for a moment, as if the world itself were asking everyone to slow down and look again. Water traced thin silver lines down the hood of the patrol car. The convenience store sign flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train sounded low and mournful, its horn stretched long across the dark like a memory that did not belong to this town alone. Marcus stood in that sound and let the silence inside him settle deeper. He had reached the point beyond embarrassment, beyond argument, beyond the instinct to explain himself to someone who had no intention of hearing. There was only breath now, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The old training had never really left him. It had just gone quiet until needed. He could feel the dampness soaking through the knees of his work pants, could feel the ache in his left shoulder pulsing in slow, heavy waves. But even pain seemed far away compared to the strange stillness that had opened around him. It was in that stillness that another person finally moved. A woman who had been standing near the store in trance stepped carefully into the rain. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with the measured caution of someone who knew that truth sometimes had to enter a scene gently if it wanted to survive. Her name was Nina Brooks, though Marcus did not know that yet. She was wearing hospital scrubs under a light tin coat, her hair tied back, her face drawn with the tired softness of somebody coming off a long shift spent taking care of people who never learned her name. She looked first at Marcus, then at the paper bag near the curb, then at Officer Blake. And in that small sequence of glances there was more humanity than the entire scene had offered up to that point. When the wind nudged the bag onto its side, a card slipped partly free from Marcus's wallet where it had fallen open in the confusion. Nina bent just enough to see it without touching it. Veteran identification. The edges were worn smooth from being carried for years. She did not announce it. She did not turn the moment into theater. She only straightened slowly, her eyes changing in that quiet, unmistakable way people do when a stranger's dignity suddenly becomes personal to them. Behind her, a child's voice floated from the back seat of a parked sedan, soft and confused through rain-streaked glass. The words were too faint for Marcus to make out clearly, but the tone was enough. A question. The kind only children still ask out loud when adults are pretending not to see what is happening. The mother in the driver's seat did not answer right away. She just gripped the steering wheel and stared forward, jaw tight, as though she was trying to decide whether speaking would help or only place another target inside the frame. Marcus closed his eyes for one brief second and opened them again. The lights, the rain, the medicine, the witnesses, the card half visible near the pavement. Piece by piece, the story Officer Blake had tried to force onto the night was beginning to loosen. Nothing had changed officially yet. No apology had come. No supervisor had arrived. But the air was no longer entirely hers. Truth had entered in small forms, in wet paper, in a veteran card, in a nurse's silence, in a child's question, and Marcus felt it the way a man feels dawn before he sees it. Faint, fragile, but real. And for the first time, since the shouting began, he understood that this night might not belong to fear forever. Marcus waited until the silence felt steady enough to hold one sentence. Then he spoke without lifting his voice. He said he wanted to make a phone call. Nothing in his tone sounded dramatic. Nothing in his face asked for pity. It was simply the request of a man who had finally understood that truth sometimes needed a witness with rank before it could enter the room. Officer Blake reacted with the same brittle certainty she had worn all night, but something in the atmosphere had already shifted. The nurse by the entrance had not moved back inside. The person recording had not lowered the phone. The mother in the sedan still sat motionless, but her window had come down an inch, enough to let the rain in and the truth out. Marcus repeated himself, calm as ever, and that calm now carried a different weight. It no longer sounded like compliance alone. It sounded like knowledge. He knew who he was. He knew what he had done. And deep down, perhaps even Officer Blake could feel that he knew something else too, something she did not yet understand. When permission finally came, it came with visible reluctance, the kind that tries to disguise itself as procedure. Marcus moved carefully, every motion deliberate, and reached for his phone with the same measured control that had carried him through the entire night. The screen was damp from mist and cold against his palm. For a second, the blue glow lit the lines of his face, and Nina Brooks, still standing under the edge of the awning, watched him with the focused stillness of someone who had spent years reading the difference between panic and pain in people's eyes. Marcus scrolled only once. There was no searching, no hesitation, no uncertainty. He pressed a name already close at hand, Colonel Raymond Carter. Retired now, but still the kind of man whose voice could straighten a room before it rose above a murmur. The call connected on the second ring. Marcus did not waste words. He gave his name, his location, and one brief summary of what was happening. He did not exaggerate. He did not perform outrage. He simply stated facts, and those facts sounded heavier than anything shouted in that parking lot all night. Then he listened. The people around him could not hear the other side clearly, only the low cadence of an older man who asked short, precise questions the way experienced leaders do when they already sense the shape of a failure. Marcus answered each one. Yes, there were witnesses. Yes, there were cameras. Yes, he had identified himself. Yes, he had complied. At the mention of cameras, something almost invisible crossed Officer Blake's face. Not fear exactly. Not yet. But the first crack in certainty. Marcus handed the phone forward when instructed, not to her, but toward the chain of authority now beginning to gather around the moment. Her jaw tightened. Her shoulders shifted. The badge on her chest suddenly looked less like power and more like scrutiny waiting to happen. A supervisor had been requested. Names were being noted. Unit numbers were repeated back. The recording phone near the gas pump kept its red light steady. Rain tapped softly against metal and glass. The whole lot, which had felt trapped under one person's version of reality just minutes earlier, now belonged to process, memory, and witnesses. And Marcus, standing there with wet sleeves, a sore shoulder, and his mother's medicine still darkening in the rain near the curb, felt the night tilt for the first time. Nothing had been fixed yet. No apology had been spoken. No truth had officially won. But Officer Blake was no longer the biggest force in the parking lot. The moment she heard the name on that call and realized it had reached beyond her, beyond the cruiser, beyond the convenience store lights, and into a world where records mattered more than assumptions, the hard confidence in her posture began to thin. And Marcus saw it. He saw the exact second authority stopped feeling permanent to the person who had used it carelessly. The first sign that the night was turning came not from a siren or a shout, but from the arrival of Sergeant Daniel Ruiz, who stepped out of the 2nd Patrol Unit with the kind of calm that did not need to announce itself. He was older than Officer Blake by at least 15 years, broad through the chest, rain darkening the shoulders of his uniform, his face carrying that worn, careful expression of a man who had learned that real authority begins by listening before it speaks. He took in the scene. In one sweep, Marcus standing soaked and steady near the front of the cruiser, Nina Brooks under the awning with her arms folded tight against the cold, a phone still recording near the gas pumps, the pharmacy bag on the pavement, and Officer Blake holding herself too stiffly for someone with nothing to worry about. Ruiz asked no grand questions at first. He only requested names, times, sequence. Marcus answered with the same quiet precision that had held him together all night. Nina spoke next, her voice tired but clear, and the details she gave landed with the clean weight of truth because they matched what Marcus had already said. Then came the next shift, small on the outside, enormous underneath. Sergeant Ruiz requested the body camera review. He did not dramatize the request. He did not accuse anyone. He simply called for the footage in the tone of a man opening a door that should have been opened earlier. The rain tapped softly against the hood of the patrol car while everyone waited. Somewhere behind them, the convenience store cooler hummed through the glass. The red and blue lights still flashed, but they no longer seemed to belong to one person's anger. They belonged to the record now. When the first pieces of footage were checked, the energy in the parking lot changed so suddenly, it almost felt physical, like a current moving through wet air. Marcus could not hear every word between the officers, but he did not need to. He saw it in Sergeant Ruiz's posture. He saw it in the way another deputy arriving on scene stopped talking halfway through a sentence. He saw it in the way Officer Blake's shoulders, which had been set hard as steel all night, lost just enough tension to reveal something underneath them. Not remorse. Not yet. But exposure. The footage confirmed what witnesses had seen. Marcus had identified himself. Marcus had moved slowly. Marcus had not escalated. The pharmacy bag had been visible. His hands had been visible. The story that had nearly swallowed him whole was collapsing under the weight of ordinary facts. Sergeant Ruiz spoke in a low voice, but every person in that lot understood the gravity of the moment anyway. Procedure changed around Officer Blake with a swiftness that felt almost unreal after so much helpless waiting. She was instructed to step back. She was instructed to account for her actions. Then, with rain sliding from the brim of his cap, Sergeant Ruiz asked for her duty weapon to be surrendered pending review. And for the first time all night the woman who had treated certainty like armor looked unmistakably small inside her own uniform. Marcus did not smile. He did not gloat. He only bent, slowly and carefully, and picked up the paper bag that held his mother's medicine. The bottom was damp. The label had begun to curl. He brushed rain from it with his thumb, as if restoring something sacred. Nina watched him with tears standing bright in her eyes, though none of them fell. The person with the phone kept recording, but even that now felt less like spectacle and more like memory refusing to let the truth be rewritten. Sergeant Ruiz turned toward Marcus then, and there was something close to apology in his face, even before the words came. Not because the damage could be undone, but because everyone present finally understood what this night had really cost. Sergeant Ruiz said the words every decent man wishes had arrived sooner. He told Marcus Holloway that he was free to go. He said there would be a formal report, that witness statements would be collected, that the footage would be preserved, that what had happened in that parking lot would not be dismissed as confusion simply because confusion was more convenient for the department than the truth. His voice was steady, careful, and stripped of every unnecessary flourish. That mattered to Marcus more than a dramatic apology ever could have. Some harms only grow uglier when people try to decorate them with the right words too late. Marcus nodded once, the motion small, almost weary, and looked down at the paper bag in his hand. The corners were soft from rain. The print on the label had blurred a little. He pressed the bag gently against his chest for a second, not out of sentiment, but out of instinct, the same instinct that had guided him through the entire night. Protect what matters, even when nobody else seems to notice it. Nina Brooks stepped closer then, stopping just short of his space the way kind people do when they understand that dignity includes distance. She told him she was sorry, not in the empty way people apologize for bad weather or long lines at a grocery store, but in the full human way, as if she understood she was speaking to a man who had been forced to carry something heavier than public embarrassment. Marcus looked at her, rain still clinging to the edge of her coat sleeve, hospital badge turned half sideways against the fabric, and gave her the first softness his face had shown all night. He thanked her. Just that. No speech. No bitterness. No performance. Yet those two words seemed to settle over the parking lot with more force than every command that had been thrown at him earlier. Because gratitude, spoken by the person who had been wronged, always reveals more about the soul of the wounded than the strength of the crowd around them. A few feet away, Officer Blake stood near the second cruiser, no longer directing the scene, no longer shaping the story, no longer able to hide inside the costume of certainty that had carried her through the night. She looked smaller now, not because her uniform had changed, but because the illusion around it had. The lights still flashed across her face, red then blue then red again, but they no longer made her seem powerful. They made her seem exposed. Marcus did not walk over to her. He did not need to. Justice had already done the talking that mattered. He turned instead toward his old Ford pickup, parked under a pale halo from the lot lamp, its windshield spotted with rain and store light. Each step toward it felt strangely quiet, as if the night had gone from shouting to listening. Sergeant Ruiz removed his cap for one brief second as Marcus passed. Not a grand gesture, just a small act of respect from one man to another. Marcus noticed it and kept walking. When he opened the truck door, the familiar smell of worn leather, cold air, and machine oil met him like something honest. He set the medicine carefully on the passenger seat, then rested both hands on the top of the door for a moment before climbing in. His shoulder ached. His clothes were damp. The fatigue in his bones felt older than midnight. But his hands were steady. Across the lot, the phone that had recorded everything finally lowered. The mother in the sedan pulled away slowly, her child's face still turned toward the seen through fog glass. Nina remained under the awning, watching in silence. Marcus started the engine, and the truck answered with its usual rough, faithful rumble. He did not look back right away. He sat there for one long breath, eyes on the windshield, listening to the wipers drag rain into two clean arcs. Then he pulled out of the parking space and drove toward home, where a porch light would still be waiting, where his mother would ask why he was late, and where he would have to decide how much of the truth to bring through the front door. Behind him, the flashing lights kept turning over wet pavement, but they no longer owned the night. What remained in that lot after he left was not fear. It was the silence that comes when power has been forced, at last, to see itself clearly.